The nation's Memory Institute and the Rusinov City District present a discussion, Community History, City Museums, Memory and Society will focus on the role of city museums and their importance for local communities, the involvement of the public in creating exhibitions and collections, and how museums create space for dialogue, memory, and community.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can start. So, welcome here in House of Culture, how we call it in Slovak language, Dom kultúry Ružinov. My name is Michal Keim. I work at Nation's Memory Institute, Ústav pamäti národa, or UPN in Slovak. We are a governmental institution which is working, researching, educating, and raising awareness about the totalitarian regimes we have had in Slovakia or Czechoslovakia in the period 1939 till 1989. And along our research, publishing books, and for example, also creating exhibitions, I'm highlighting that because we are not a museum, but right. Museums will be topic today with our guest. We run such debates or discussions for the public all around Slovakia. So welcome again, and also big thank you for the local municipality of Ružinov, which provides us with this place. We have had the discussion 2 weeks ago, and we will continue with discussions in English also in the autumn. That was our meeting this week. That's a new update. So we will come with new topics which are relevant for English-speaking people, foreigners living in Bratislava or in close suburbs. So here we have Glenn Perkins from USA. Welcome.
Thank you, Michal.
Glenn, he's here for several months on a scholarship, Fulbright scholarship. He is a curator in History Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, in USA. So first of all, and a small reminder for all of you, we will record it. So the audio record will be a podcast episode in our upcoming podcast series. So we will speak for 45 minutes, maybe 1 hour, we will see. Then if you have some questions or comments, we can follow up with the debate. Feel free to ask, feel free to raise your hand and comment. Maybe my first question on you is, how is your Fulbright scholarship experience in Slovakia? And maybe you can introduce what it is right. for the audience.
Well, yes, and thank you again, Michal. Thank you all for coming out tonight and listening and wanting to learn a little bit about where I'm coming from, my experience. And so it's really been it's just been a wonderful opportunity for me to have this chance to spend a few months in Slovakia as a Fulbright scholar. Fulbright is the U.S. program of education and cultural exchange that's been going on for decades and decades from the U.S. and there are commissions in many countries across the globe, and the Fulbright Commission here in Slovakia is, I think, an especially welcoming one, encouraging different kinds of projects. So alongside bringing in recent graduates to teach English all around the country, they sponsor several scholars, which can both be researchers, people with academic background, but also artists and practitioners. And one great thing about the Slovak Commission's program, I think, is that they have space for what they call professional projects. So I come to Slovakia, to Bratislava, in order to have time to exchange experiences and exchange sort of professional practice with colleagues at the Bratislava City Museum. So I've been here since January and really learning a lot from that institution and from an opportunity to go and travel and visit some other city museums in the region.
Thank you very much. You are working with a topic or approach which, for at least for me in person or in Slovakia, from the way we approach history, first of all, we use like the political history, the big history, or the stuff we learn in schools, and we see online or in TV. Community history is something very specific you work with. So maybe can you describe what means community history for you, and maybe also for the museum in Greensboro in North Carolina?
Right. So my actual title is curator of community history at my home museum, and I can tell you about that institution in a little bit. But the way that I approach, this idea of community history, it's really looking at history from both the perspective and the participation of people. And these are, when I think about communities, and I think different museums, different institutions, different historians think about, this idea differently. And of course, it translates differently into lots of different languages. But even within English, I feel like there's different understandings. What does community mean? So I think of communities as kind of as groups of people who are bound either by some sort of common inheritance or common geography or common identity, and even common things that they like. Right? You can have the motorcycle community of the guys who like to ride around on their big Harleys. So it's when I think about this idea of community history, it's how do we use different kinds of sources to understand the past and people's relationship to that past. So alongside things like archival research, going to newspapers, these traditional sources of historiography that lots of historians use, we also spend a lot of time consulting with people about oral histories, about community memory, about community understanding of what places mean that maybe doesn't come down in the archival or documentary record in the same way. And it's also an opportunity to include people in understanding kind of the big questions about what those histories are, what the places they live in mean to them, what the moments of how they understand the moments of the past that shape their lives and shape their cities.
Can you give us some examples? What are the communities in Greensboro?
That's a great question. So Greensboro is a city in the southeastern part of the United States. And it's about 300,000 people, so less than half the size of Bratislava, but it's still a very lively city. A lot of educational institutions. So within the South, we have a lot of racial communities, large African American population, especially in Greensboro. Probably almost 40% of the city. A good number of immigrants from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of communities from everywhere from Southeast Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa to the Middle East to Central and South America. So we've got those communities of where people come from, right? Sort of those ethnic, racial origin communities. There's also, different neighborhood communities because each neighborhood has its own different identity and its own kind of cultural approach to things. So there's those neighborhood communities. And then, like I said, there's different kinds of communities of other kinds of identities. LGBTQ communities are very active in our city. So, working with them, working with artist communities, creative communities. These all interweave, and of course, people can belong to different communities. They can have feet in different parts of the city and different sort of lives of the city. So it's weaving together a lot of those different experiences. Religious communities. I mean, I can go on and on because there's so many different ways of these overlapping sort of circles of belonging that people associate themselves with and identify with.
Yeah, thank you. This is really interesting from my perspective, because in Slovakia or at least how the curriculum in schools is built, and also the mental setup, we look on national history and then the world history. So for us, community, we understand the communities are present in a society, but community history, it's something which is really, I would say even it doesn't exist, because it's a history of the majority. Yeah. In Slovakia or on the territory we are living in the current Slovakia. So, and this is really great approach where you can involve, because I consider it as a part of society, even though you are from this or that community. Maybe what kind of program, because you are it's about the museum,
right?
Museology. So how is it transferred to museums or exhibitions or the work you?
Right. So, I mean, I think our big historical thread, and so I work at the City Museum, Greensboro History Museum. It's a museum that was founded by volunteers about 1924, has been growing and evolving, and is now part of the city of Greensboro. Of the municipal government as a public-private partnership with the museum, with the city of Greensboro. So our focus is largely on, the history of our city and the evolution of the people who make up that city. And the things that, of course, but threaded through Greensboro's history are national stories, right? We had a Revolutionary War battle way back in the 1700s, as folks were fighting for American independence. We've got important stories connected to the Underground Railroad and people's journeys to freedom during enslavement. We've got stories about things connected to the Civil War and life after the Civil War. So one really interesting community kind of project or way that these sort of levels of history, if you want to call them that, connect was with a project we did about Warnersville, which was what we call a freedman's city. After the Civil War, you have thousands of formerly enslaved people who are now emancipated and seeking new, ways to live their lives, to raise families, to be able to actually participate in the country that had previously, called them property. In Greensboro, we have a city, our neighborhood, kind of one of the oldest African-American neighborhoods is Warnersville, founded by Quakers, Quaker from Philadelphia, actually, who bought property, and helped people sort of establish their own families and lives. This community continues for generations and generations. It changes, throughout those centuries and decades, but that there's some of that memory that resonates in the people who live there. They know that they live in a place or probably are related to people, who had to reinvent their entire lives after coming out of enslavement and slavery. So we can talk about those kinds of, big, national thematic issues, I think, also by looking at this really personal and locally based history.
Yeah. And also, does your museum provide I would say, cultural space or workshops or weekend programs? Because our perspective, or my own museum, is a very traditional, old school institution where you go in and there is one exhibition and another with different topics from natural science up to history. But basically, it's something where I passively watch or experience some knowledge or topics. So if you have some kind of programs, or if the communities, they somehow contribute to the exhibitions or maybe future exhibitions you plan.
Yeah, programming is really important to this kind of work because it's a way to sort of invite people in, to allow them to have different kinds of cultural expressions or expressions that are important to them. So that could be, for us as in Greensboro, we do a lot of things with some of our Southeast Asian immigrant communities and East Asian immigrant communities. So, annually we have maybe our largest program at the museum is a Lunar New Year celebration, sort of marking the traditional, sometimes called Chinese New Year, but it's an opportunity for different groups, who mark that celebration to come and share performances and kind of highlight what they do in the city in order to either perpetuate their own cultural traditions, to kind of keep a group identity happening, but also it could be there could also be young artists, right, who make artwork that's influenced by that cultural identity that they have. And then a chance for and anybody who comes in off the street to learn more about that, to eat some yummy food. And we're not the only ones doing that. Just this past weekend, I was, at the Bratislava City Museum. They had a fantastic program for their series called Spicy Depository that brought in, that works with Loom here in the Foreign Office in Bratislava to kind of to highlight a lot of the immigrant and foreigner communities here in Bratislava. It was so much fun. There was dancing, there was music, there was food. So I think those are some of the things that connect people, that draw people into the museum. A chance to experience. To learn about someone else's perspective and to learn about someone else's history and how they are continuing to make history by making their place in a new society. So that's just one example for at least talking about immigrant communities.
Now maybe a difficult question. Yeah. I believe this is a very positive approach where you can connect the minorities with the majority and inclusion. Do you measure impact, or do you have a feedback, like on a long-term way, or from local communities?
Yeah, we're always trying to sort of to kind of think, at least in my home museum, how this, how do we measure belonging, right? Becomes this really challenging question. How do you have a sense that somebody from, a group that maybe isn't the dominant group in your city, or even the traditionally dominant group in your city, how do you understand that they feel like they have a place in your institution? And then a bigger question: how do they feel like they have a place in the city? So I think that finding those data points has been very challenging. Some of it is just sort of measuring anecdotal responses. Some of it is just sort of seeing how, measuring how groups and associations and organizations repeat, right? How they come back, how you're able to kind of prolong those relationships you have. But I think that it's an area for study. I think it's something that I'm hoping to work more with different partners in our city to understand and to sort of tie together some of the measurements that we do use to understand that. Because, like I said, I feel like it's a bigger picture than just people's involvement in the museum, but really that sense of how they identify themselves within the city.
If you work with different communities, their history, and often it can be very sensitive, or sensitive topics might approach. Have you experienced some challenges with this? Because if you like support one community or highlight cultural, political, historical events, features, whatever, it might be harmful for another one. But again, it's about the perspective and learning about each other. So have you experienced something similar?
I think it can be, yes. I think it can be a challenge for sort of thinking about, I'm going to give two examples. Sort of broadly, it can, a museum, like any sort of channel, you've got limited space and limited time and limited resources and people who can that you can use to, sustain these relationships. And, you can only do so many exhibitions a year. So you're not going to get all the communities. You're not going to get all the diversity of your city in a way that you would like. And then there's also is the really interesting challenge of difficult topics. Sometimes we call difficult history, but that things that really community history can play an important role in helping understand people's sensitivity. One of the sort of most challenging parts of Greensboro history for me and for I think our city to have dealt with was we're really well known in the national civil rights story for a sit-in movement that started in 1960, where 4 college freshmen, black students sat down at a whites-only lunch counter and really sparked part of the civil rights movement that involves students that engaged 18, 19, actually even high school students, and really helped push the momentum and enthusiasm for passage of civil rights legislation nationwide. So the Greensboro sit-ins in 1960 are a really important part of that story, something that nowadays I think everybody in Greensboro is fairly universally proud that these students took that stand in our city. But that's certainly not the end of the civil rights story or in Greensboro. So actually in 1979, there was sort of another thing that came up in the city's history where a sort of a militant Black Power group called the was holding a march. It was actually they called themselves the Communist Workers' Party, and they was holding a march called the Death to the Klan March, against the Ku Klux Klan. And if you know anything about American history, the Klan was very violent, white supremacist organization. So the Klan actually came, killed 5 of the protesters at the march, despite the city police knowing about this. And so there was a long history for decades of both the perpetrators, the murderers of the activists, not being prosecuted or getting off at trial. The kind of organizers of the march being vilified, being for bringing this violence to town and being outsiders. So there was a really long process that actually turned into a restorative kind of history moment of being able to have a truth. Actually, they had a truth and reconciliation panel in the city that drew on some of these same kinds of community history sources, first-person testimonies, personal documentation, personal archives, and things like that, to deliver a report to the city that really didn't go anywhere. So even being able to sort of pick up and talking about that history at our museum has been challenging because we're part of the city. So some of the accusation is pointed at the city's response to that march, to the violence that occurred there. And so as an institution, it was challenging in a lot of ways to talk about it. And even now, even a few years ago, before 2020, when I was trying to do programs about it, I was getting calls, saying, I can't believe you're doing a program about the Greensboro Massacre, which is what we wound up calling that day in 1979. But, we sort of had to persist in the facts and persist in the work that had been done about what that, about both what that day and that violence meant to the city, but also what the work of understanding it and the Truth and Reconciliation process. And so now it's something I think we are able to talk about a little bit more objectively without so much pushback on the city. So I think it's, you go into challenging territories as well when you talk about community history. It's not necessarily just about, being, sort of all the great things that your neighbors and your immigrant neighbors can bring to your place. There's definitely some challenging material as well.
I will follow up on the reconciliation. In Slovakia or Czechoslovakia, after the fall of communism, there was not really a reconciliation, and long story short, there are scars or still some communists in power, etc. So have the society or the community or the people of Greensboro reconciliated, or is it even possible to call it a closed process? Because maybe it's still ongoing or never ending process. So do you have some advice for us maybe how to work with reconciliation?
I mean, I don't know that I have complete advice on that, because I think you're going to ask me. I'm going to preempt you with a question, because you're going to ask me sort of what's the some similarities between Greensboro and Slovakia, and my answer to that was going to be that we both have very different kinds of unresolved traumas in our past that tie into our histories. So in the United States, and in Greensboro as well, it's that history of enslavement, of white supremacy, as well as sort of the indigenous genocide that happened within American history. But I think it's still those wounds of enslavement and the white supremacist era that persisted in sort of the apartheid Jim Crow state that was dominant in the city of Greensboro for the first part of the 20th century, from 1890s till the 1960s. That's still within living memory in so many ways. And I think that, the steps we have to take to address that and to think about that is some of the challenge that has been, that is actually, continues to fuel some of the political division, because it's really hard to get people on the same page without, I guess it's just very emotional for people. And the sense that maybe, your community, right? If you were sort of from, a white middle class, background, was in some ways part of the perpetuation of those systems of white supremacy. That's, it's still, I think that was something that people pushed to talk about in certain ways over the past 5-10 years, and there's certainly been a pushback, against how we discuss that. So the the pendulum, or the shift of how that reconciliation works is definitely an ongoing thing. So, do we have any advice for another country, sort of thinking about and assessing and dealing with those scars of the past? I don't know. I mean, I think that we both just kind of persist and try to find different ways to get people to understand little by little.
Yep. You work with sensitive topics with the local communities, as we spoke about, and it needs courage and also skills. Does your staff in the museum, you have some like internal trainings, or you maybe think another way that even from curator or other staff in the museum, which skills you have, or trainings, however we call it, methodologies you use that helps you to work with the sensitive topics with various different communities?
Yeah, fortunately, we have sort of the benefits of a city government that seems to be interested in sort of this value in inclusionary approaches to our city's diverse communities. So we get some of that with through trainings with the city has a human rights department for the city of Greensboro that works with issues around. It includes an international advisory committee that where people who were born outside of the United States can kind of still have a say in speak to the policies that the city is developing. They have a commission on the status of women, so they're really and transgender task force. So that they're trying to really address some of the different perspectives and needs that come up with different communities or different identities, I should say, in that sense, more within the city. But some of it is, I think, a practice that we try to do in relating to people that really some of it just starts with listening and being able to make time to sort of sit with somebody and to accept that some of the processes for putting on an exhibition like the Warnersville exhibition or working with our Pride festival organizers is going to take a lot of just sort of sitting down, listening, and being patient and sort of taking time to tune in to what really matters to those communities and those people who are trying to, who want their story to show up in the museum in some ways. So I think it's a mix of sort of some of the practical skills, but also just being to approach history from a place of care and listening and patience.
So you have a good support from the city and the municipality.
Yeah, we're lucky to have that as well as from the board of the nonprofit that sort of partners with the museum. So I think that having an alignment of values there is a very helpful situation. So institutionally, it can be really challenging to approach topics that would be really political, right? I can't necessarily advocate for certain solutions or for certain people to access. Certainly not for certain candidates or kind of platform issues, because my responsibility as a city employee, a government employee, is to be, is to be politically balanced. But at the same time, I can look to the values of the city and of the institution and say, okay, this is something, if this speaks to a value that we really do want to find empowerment for people who have, previously been underrepresented, or who haven't gotten necessarily their fair share of things, then I can, I can try to think about it and make an approach that way because, again, of those values that the city is willing to state.
I think we are living in Slovakia in the period where values are very important. Mm-hmm. Maybe can you give us an example? What are the top 3 values in your museum or city?
That's a good question that I wasn't necessarily prepared for. But I think that, I think these are words that have recently had a great deal of pushback certainly at the federal level in the United States and also in North Carolina at the state level. But I think the city continues to respect that there is value in the diversity of our city, and that's just different experiences. It's not necessarily just different skin colors or different socioeconomic strata, but really that you can even have different mindsets and different approaches. So really that, sort of valuing that as well. The city kind of prides itself, I guess, on this idea of being data-driven, right? So I don't necessarily think of data-driven as a value, but I do think that there's an objectivity and a willingness to really study the evidence behind things and really to focus on the sources is also an important value that ties into that. That ties into that for the city. And then just valuing learning, I think, is also important. To me, that extends to the idea of valuing curiosity. If I'm curious about the different communities in my city, maybe I'm a little bit more willing to respect that they do something a little differently, or that they're speaking a language that I don't understand, or with an accent that maybe I don't understand. So I think that, those are 3 that certainly come to mind to answer your question.
Nice, thank you. Now I would like to zoom out from Greensboro to maybe a wider perspective, because you've been the chair of the ICOM's City Museums Committee. So maybe short intro, what ICOMS stands for, and if you have experienced or seen some either projects, exhibitions, or museums which were really world level showcase.
Right. So ICOM is the International Council of Museums. It's a it's an international group of member states that are national member states that connect museum professionals or people working within the museum sphere all around the world. So I forget exactly how many thousand members that they have, but I think there's nearly 200 national committees. So within those, so you kind of join through your national committee, but then you have an opportunity to join an international committee. That's where the fun stuff happens, because that's when you get to make museum friends across borders and to really understand. And there's 35, I think, international committees, and one of them is dedicated to city museums. So when I started working in the museum in Greensboro, I've always been somebody who really was interested in international stuff and in the world all around me, and in making connections with people all around the world. So I thought, here's a fun thing I can do. I can connect with some other museum professionals this way. So and then I was like, I work at a city museum. I'm going to find out what other city museums do. Long story short, somehow they put me in charge of this committee. But it's really been an amazing opportunity to again to meet with people who are in city museums throughout the world. And for me, city museums artists have a really interesting relationship with their locality, with their people, and with people. Because cities are, we're speaking about the history of residents' lives. And that's been a really helpful part of my time here on my Fulbright in Slovakia, because I've been able to connect with city museums throughout a little bit of the broader region of Central Europe, places like Graz and Prague and Zagreb. So it's been really fascinating to see how some of these different museums that are most of them are anywhere from like 120, 140 years old to maybe even 40 or 50 years old. So, and a lot of, and they're all doing kind of different approaches. So you asked about, who's doing some just like super amazing and cool stuff. So it, back home, I think there's one of my favorites is the Montreal City Museum, the Musée des Mémoires Montréalaises, that's really looking at the story of Montreal through the memories of different Montrealers. So the exhibition space is very much about daily life, how people's apartments look and how they get around and what it's like to ride a bike in Montreal in the middle of the freezing weather. Amsterdam Museum has been a long time doing really, really innovative stuff about not about immigrant communities within Amsterdam, but also about things, even like talking about prostitution in the red light districts in the city and what life is like, for people having to work in sex work there. Topics that I think for a lot of museums were just be like, oh my gosh, we cannot talk about that. So they are very brave about doing things like that. London Museum has done some fascinating things with their research program too, around things even like compassion on public transportation. So I think these different museums are just, what inspires me is sort of taking a little thread that they find in the history of their city and sort of pulling on it to see what will come out that really will speak to the bigger character of the city. And it's not just the big city museums, because I've mentioned a few of those, but a couple of weeks ago, I got to visit Budapest, and there was a community museum dedicated to the 18th district of Budapest, called the Tomori Lajos Museum. And they were doing all these activities to really speak to the culture of that district of the city, which is a newer district, but it's still like 100,000 people. So it's probably bigger than some city museums that they're talking about. And so they had both exhibitions about the lives of the people, its connection to the airport, the old Hungarian, where a lot of the people were employed, but just like small things from people's lives that really talked about the people have brought to them, both about the local schools and about the local factories and the local photo studios that really gave that area its particular character, and just it's both the big picture and even sort of the neighborhood picture that's fascinating.
Thank you. Do you have experience maybe from Greensboro or from any other museums? When we speak about museums, we speak about exhibitions, which are limited, or quite often they're limited with time and space. And for example, in our case, we have cooperated with museums in national or local level, but basically the exhibition is there for half year, maybe 1 year, and then it's gone. Like traditional outcome also is like a catalog or book about it. But is there any other way how you can preserve, because some of the exhibitions, they might work very well, and it's a pity to replace them with some other new, maybe even better exhibition. But if you've experienced a good exhibition which was also able to survive afterwards online or in other way.
Yeah, I think digital, it helps preserve some of those stories in useful ways. But even digital, breaks down. We did, I think the Warnersville exhibition I talked about had a lovely digital platform for circa 2010. And then, of course, everything was in Adobe Flash or whatever that they discontinued, and so it causes some of the content that you hope will be very long lived on digital doesn't always work that way. I think what works the best is when you make a relationship through an exhibition, through a community exhibition, and you're able to expand that relationship to different kinds of future projects. So, say, we worked with the Cambodian community in Greensboro for an exhibition about their arrival and their integration into the city. I think that was sort of one of the earliest ones that that I know of that they did at my museum in the early 2000s. Later on, through sort of sustaining some of those relationships through programming, through things like the Lunar New Year program, we were also able to kind of reconnect and find another platform for those voices and those folks in an exhibit that was called Second Generation Asian American, which talked about sort of the special experience of children being born in the United States to immigrant parents, and what that and sort of their having to balance between the different identities that they were having to maybe more focused on their parents' country of origin at home, but they're also trying to take that identity and reshape it into something that fits with their contemporaries and their friends that they're growing up with. So because we had those relationships with the Cambodian community, we were able to sustain that to another exhibition, and so I think that a lot of the sustainability has to be about relationships as well as about actual materials from the exhibit.
Cool, thank you. Inspiring. Good. I would like to ask how you build relationships with the community. Maybe you have answered already, like to get them involved, because I believe it's also kind of a fragile topic, and also how to maybe deconstruct the point of view of majority, or because we are speaking almost all the time about communities, but there is also the majority, or also the majority are the communities, etc. So it's like a magical circle. Yeah. Because sometimes one day I might feel as part of a community, and next week I will consider as also another member of another community. So what supports building the trust and the community itself, and also maybe we can call it society or...
Yeah, I think that building the trust, starts with that sort of listening and patience that I mentioned. But a lot of times is if we connect with an organization and just find an easy way to do kind of an introductory program to sort of show that, from my museum point of view, show that we're game, we're excited to play with you and to do something and to put on something fun. So that often gives you a burst of energy that you can sort of start with. So we even have something in our museum, very small, called the Community Voices Space. It's a place that organizations can kind of essentially put on their own exhibition with our help, and then it's sort of their story in our space. And interestingly, I've seen several of the museums I've visited have similar similar kinds of things. In Krakow, in particular, they had what they called a community depository in a couple of their branches, where folks could just bring in their own story to sort of produce and to have that platform and stage. And it works well with programs too, really giving organizations control to kind of shape how they want that program to look, what it is they want to communicate with that, and being as hands-off as possible regarding, oh, you should do it this way or shouldn't do it this way, but being hands-on when they say, oh, we need help. Like, I don't know how to write a museum label, or, can you, we need you to promote this program so that the folks will show up. So the hands-on with what we're asked to do, and the hands-off where stuff we're not asked to. And I think that, in terms of that relationship and that balance between, I guess, for lack of a better phrase right now in my brain, dominant, groups within a place, within a city, let's say, or minority within a city. I think that, finding those different commonalities, because as I mentioned, right, it's not, as I see it and as I try to convey it in Greensboro, and as I'm trying to talk to partners and colleagues working in museums around and city museums around the world, that this idea of community isn't just limited to ethnicity, skin color, language, things like that, but actually, these different communities that people can occupy in different ways, and I think I think foodie is like a great community that you can use to sort of, spread the circle around, because, almost everybody likes food. And so when you can bring in, different stories about traditional foods, about, how people make and eat foods, that's always a way to connect, dancing. And so I think that when you establish the sort of relationships between those different, between those communities, those inherited communities, and the ones that are more about stuff you like to do and stuff you like to experience, that helps, I think, bridge that gap some between us and them, so that you make the programs and topics less about exclusionary, sort of exclusive identity in the next stage of working with people, and to continue to find those commonalities of belonging that really can connect people.
I have learned that you have foodies community. I'm not sure if Slovakia we have like foodies, but to consider someone is a member of community of foodies. Yeah,
it's sort of like a gourmand, but it's just like
I got it, but I was just like surprised, like, oh, cool, maybe I am foodie as well. Cool. Glenn, imagine that we are establishing a museum related to history, totalitarian regimes. How about what should be a keystone or like core principles, values, or approach? Maybe if you establish a brand new museum, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of what's of value in museum is stories and personal narratives. I think sometimes, you have to approach those with an understanding that memory, the memory is really a challenging thing. As historians, we're always looking for the absolute solid, source that's going to tell us something really happened in this way. But historians also know that documentary records reflect certain biases. Newspapers are, full of bias. Archival records, even, can always show, have the potential of expressing something in a certain way. And so they all thread together so when you pull evidence from different sources, including those communities, I think voices, that tells to me a really meaningful picture. And sometimes it's hard because if you want somebody to pay attention to a concept, to really learn something about something like totalitarianism, but it's the experience of that pressure, right, on people's lives, the reaction of the resilience that people had to maintain to live under those. So the small acts of self-preservation, resistance, all those are powerful stories. And so I think that, what museums can really do effectively is both collect the diverse kinds of evidence that you can use to tell one of those stories, to put it alongside a personal testimony, a personal interview that you might do with somebody who experienced that. And to really try to give a full picture of the different kinds of decisions people had to make, the different kinds of adjustments they had to make to live within a system. But, also the things that they may have had to lose or sacrifice because they were existing under those systems. I think that, so it's really finding a voice, putting it next to other pieces of evidence, and really trying to tell compelling stories. I think it's something that museums, we do know how to do. Sometimes we're not that good at telling people about that we know how to do it. But I think it really is an interesting mix of skills to be able to do something like that and to really communicate history in that way that's where somebody steps out and goes, oh wow, I really feel like I learned somebody's story who could have been me, who could have been my grandparents, and it's made me think about things just a little different.
I have a last question. Mm-hmm. If I am an individual, not a museum staff, mm-hmm. but I want to support a local museum or national museum, local, wherever I live, how do you think we can contribute or support the museums other than paying entrance fee?
I think, attendance is, we love attendance and feedback, and I think encouraging but also sort of being a voice. If you know somebody who works in a museum, sort of telling them, what it is that you love to see in a museum. Because I know I'm always willing to try to, I heard somebody likes game night. We're going to have, history bingo, history pub quiz at my museum. If I hear that, people want more places to dance, we're going to find a way to connect some DJs to whatever the story is. They did that in Bratislava just last past weekend because there's an exhibition about non-European objects within the museum's collection. So this, the Spicy Depository Project was able to sort of, bring out some DJs to play music that reflected the cultures that are in that exhibition. So the possibilities are there as long as people are sort of, being willing to, share what would be interesting, what would be fun. And then I think at the upper level, always expressing the value of history and culture to the powers that are, resourcing, that are either funding or controlling those within your sphere. So, saying to, in my case, saying to the state of North Carolina, museums really matter. Can you please make sure that, there's budget for for our our state museums and our state historical organizations. So I think that it can be very useful for communicating that to the powers that be sometimes as well. So, and then just caring about history, caring about your community, and being curious about what's the story behind this, whatever this thread I want to pull up to really ask about, and to just be curious about it for your city.
Thank you very much, Glenn. From my side, I think I have asked everything I wanted to. So now I would like to give you the opportunity to ask a question. If you have some or comment, I will pass you the microphone.
Hello, Glenn.
Hi, Benjamin.
So let me give some context to this question for other people, because Glenn and I know each other from meeting here in Bratislava. So you and I both have been in cities from cities that have a lot of community. You're from Greensboro or live there, and I'm from Philadelphia, where there are clear communities of all the different stripes. You talked about ethnic, hobby-oriented, etc. Other places, at least that I've lived, Toronto has that, Taipei has that, etc. But some cities don't have that, or it's not apparent. Like when I was in Reykjavik, Iceland, for another Fulbright, it was very hard to find what the communities were, much less to connect with them. So with Bratislava, I'm curious about your experience with that, because you and I are in different worlds, and I'm at the university, and obviously that's a kind of community of sorts. Like, do you find that you've been able, in our short time here, to identify some communities here? And if not, like, what are the challenges to identifying that here? Because as I said, when I was in Reykjavik, it was very difficult for a variety of reasons, but just your take on that.
That's an interesting question. And, as an outsider, what I perceive in life looks like in Bratislava might be very different from what my museum colleagues, see and interact with. Language is a real barrier there, and not being able to speak Slovak, and certainly not enough to pick up on sort of the nuance of how different cultural affiliations and cultural communities are expressed can be a little challenging. But, I think you can also see, certainly in the cultural life of this city, that's what I really find particularly vibrant right now. I know that it's challenging within the cultural context of Bratislava and Slovakia right now, but sort of having learned about the ways that people are standing up for that value of culture in their lives has been one way that I've kind of appreciated, the sense of at least that kind of community. Going to the program on Saturday was really a little, kind of cool and revealing to really learn more about the number of non-Slovak groups within Bratislava that somebody was just telling me are really growing at a rate that maybe is harder to see in just riding the tram around or walking back and forth. So yeah, I think 4 months is really hard to appreciate that. But again, it's really, it's less it's not my job to identify communities in Bratislava. It's my job to share my experiences with the museum folks, and to learn, sort of how their experiences of it are doing. So I think that's sort of exchanging that process and how we view some of those things, I think has been good. So I don't know if that answered your question at all. Okay.
I will just comment shortly from my perspective as a local and Slovak. For us, sometimes even we don't think in the community perspectives, and if so, geographically, like okay, I'm from this city and etc. I think the Slovaks, we are really good in like labeling each other, and basically the other way around, like we can like cluster people, like okay, you are from the east or whatever. So and it's a matter of identity, because it's how you feel, or if you feel as a part of the society, because you can live in the same neighborhood, but you are not feeling as a part of it. So I think this is not even in our mindset. I don't think we do not understand, but community is maybe another word, because we can say komunita. It's community, the same thing, neighborhood, or like I'm either now thinking like if I am part of a community, maybe one or two, but I'm not sure right now.
That just made me think. So I stay, my apartment's in Petržalka. So one thing that I did pick up on when I started telling people I was staying in Petržalka, they would go, "Oh, Petržalka," because, and I was like, oh, that means something. So there are these little signifiers, that you can sort of learn to pick up on. And then, if it's something you want to sort of follow and interrogate, and to really understand what people's assumptions about a certain place are, or pride within that place. Yeah, you do have to ask the questions. But that's part of the fun of the investigation.
Can I ask a second question? So this is something, again, you and I talked about before, but I guess I'm asking for your take on a more meta level, not necessarily, your stay here. So cultural appropriation, particularly as it relates to museums. We talked about this because my daughter is doing archaeology, and she and I talk about this all the time. And not just about stuff in the past, like the Egyptian artifacts, but even if you have stuff from an African-American community, and this is a big thing in Philly. So how would you define cultural appropriation? What do you define as a necessary, let's say, role of a museum in taking cultural artifacts, preserving them, and having people experience them, versus that being somehow a violation of a particular group's sanctity, let's say?
Yeah, that's a hard question. But I do think, sort of my take on what, cultural appropriation might be is when somebody tells me, I think you're appropriating my culture. And of course, that is one that you have to make the mistake in order to invite. But what we try to do at our museum for sure is again, sort of build on the relationships we have with groups, or really try to foster new ones in order to ensure that whoever is we're doing a program about, the Korean community, that the Korean community is the lead in that program. That said, I think it is also important to note that communities are never of one mind, right? The communities have ties, again, of those different kinds of ties that bond people together, but that doesn't mean they're going to have the same opinion or the same, sense of what's appropriate. So I think being ready for debate that might come up even within a community about working with a museum like that's sort of a city identified museum level. That's being able to prepare yourself for that is important as well. So yeah, just acknowledging again that the communities are not going to be monolithic, that you can't sort of represent them with one voice is important to that question you ask.
Thanks.
So, thank you very much for your question, comments. Glenn Perkins, thank you very much for coming here. It was a pleasure to talk, a lot of inspiration and different perspectives from you as Greensboro, but also from your experience from the ICOM. I wish you all the best in the following weeks or the last days of Fulbright scholarship in Slovakia. And yeah, thank you again. Thank you for coming. And we will meet next time in autumn. We will continue with the English-speaking debates, discussions from September on. Or if you attend Slovak-speaking discussions, debates, there will be more as well. So thank you again for this place, for the venue from the municipality of Ružino. And this is it. Have a nice weekend and evening. Good.